Hello, everyone. Let's dive into a pretty heavy topic today. I like to spend time at coffee shop, so I'm recording at a coffee shop today. We'll see how it goes. Um, but today I want to dive into this piece, which was published by the Free Press a couple of days ago. If you're not familiar with the Free Press, I would argue it's the most credible and viable alternative media outlet that has emerged in today's new media landscape. It was founded by Barry Weiss, who's a former editor at the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times. It has come under some criticism, so I don't want you to think, if you're not familiar with the Free Press, I don't want you to think like it's the gold standard or like the alternative to legacy media, but it is one of the better options that have emerged. It's on Substack, so you can subscribe to it there if you're interested. But today's piece that I'm going to talk about is titled AI Will Change What It Is to Be Human. Are We Ready? And this was written by Tyler Cowen and Avital Balwit. Tyler Cowen is a professor, an economics professor at George Mason University. I hadn't heard of Avital Balwit before. She's the chief of staff for the CEO at Anthropic, which is one of the major AI companies that's currently vying for market share right now. Both approach this very academically. Obviously, like Tyler Cowen is a professor, but I was looking at Avital's background. She was a Rhodes Scholar. She went to the University of Virginia, was a Rhodes Scholar, and it looks like she might have finished her education around 2022, 2023. So she's only been in the real world for a couple of years. And yes, she is writing from the context of being a chief of staff for a major AI CEO. And is obviously very intelligent and knowledgeable about this. But I do want to couch this within that context because folks coming from academia don't always grasp what's happening on Main Street. And as we'll dive into this essay, you'll see they look at it from a very top level view. They say, okay, these changes are happening, but they don't really go into the details about like what this means for the rest of us. And this is the gap I'm trying to fill, both by recording these videos here on YouTube, but then also publishing at Tomorrow Today on Substack as I write extensively about this topic, because I really do think we are in the most significant fundamental shift in human history. So just to like give you a little bit of perspective of where I'm coming from, up until now, and I say now, relatively speaking, up until like maybe the 1970s, 1980s, all technological innovation was with regard to human physical labor, right? So machines, tools, animals, processes, production, all that kind of stuff had to do with augmenting human physical labor, making it easier for humans to produce things. Once the internet developed, computers and like knowledge work and all this kind of stuff, we started shifting where the competitive advantage for humans was no longer physical labor and what we could do with our hands and our bodies. It was what we could do with our minds. And now that is coming under threat. Obviously, like AI is developing at a rapid pace, and the intent of AI is to replace humans. And there's going to be benefits to this. I don't think that this is going to be well, I don't say it's going to be all benefit, but there's possibilities for a good future with this. There's also possibilities for a dystopian future. So it's up to us now as this is being created to arm ourselves and educate ourselves and be aware of like the fork in the road and which option we can take. I do think there's potential with this, right? Like AI is not all bad, but it's also not all good. And if you're not aware of the significance and you're not like getting ready for it, it's going to catch you off guard. Like I think a lot of people up until maybe a couple of years ago were either oblivious to it, right? No one up until probably ChatGPT came online. I don't think the average person really knew what was going on. I didn't. I absolutely didn't. I had no idea what any of this was or that this was happening in Silicon Valley, right? And now it's here, and we're trying to catch up to something that has been in existence for, I would say, about a decade now, since AlphaGo beat Lee Sedol and Go back in 2016. So I'd say the quote-unquote AI revolution has been here for about a decade now, and the rest of us are catching up to what's already been at play. But as you can see, like the pace of development is happening so fast that once you learn one thing, it becomes obsolete very quickly. And so I think this is going to be an existential threat, not just for, work and how jobs. I think that's a huge part of it in the short term. That's going to be a huge risk. A lot of people are going to lose jobs. But on a macro level, obviously, like what it means to be human, like where we get value. We've structured society in such a way that we derive value from our jobs and our status and our credentials and degrees. Like we've diminished the value of family and motherhood. That's a big conversation right now. Is the role of women and feminism, and so we've transformed society to be more modern and to meet us at this cognitive level, and that's going away. And so how do you derive meaning and purpose and like a reason to get out of bed in the morning if you don't have a job, if there's something smarter than you? I recently wrote a piece about, I'm working on a series right now about the Gen Z unemployment crisis. And as I was doing research for it, I came across, I mentioned a few moments ago, Lee Sedol. He is a world-renowned Go player. Go is a really difficult game that's popular in Asia. It's probably harder than chess, I would say. And so he was world renowned. He lost to AlphaGo, which was a computer program and a self-taught computer program built by DeepMind. And within a couple of years, he retired because he's like, okay, like there's this thing that's never, like, I'm never going to be better than it. So why bother? And so I think this is going to happen to a lot of people. It's like, okay, we don't have hobbies anymore. Everyone has like side hustles and everyone works. Okay, but what happens when work goes away? Okay, we stopped building families. We moved away from them. Young people, my generation, Gen Z, I'm a millennial. Millennials and Gen Z like aren't having families. So like that's not something we can focus our attention on. So like how do you find purpose and meaning in a world where you're going to have to compete on cognitive level, on a higher cognitive level with something that like you can't compete against? And I think that's going to be really traumatic for a lot of people. So anyways, this essay kind of dives into some of the things that we need to start thinking about. So let's dive in. So obviously, right off the baseline, they've kind of said what I was just talking about. Like the scope and pace of technological innovation is unfolding now. It's not just reshaping the economy, it's reshaping our very understand what it means to be human. And they go into this, and I do think this is going to be true. This can usher in an age of human flourishing, the likes of which we have never seen before. I do believe that to be true. I think like it can free us from the tyranny of work, to put it politely, and like not even just work itself, but like bullshit work that isn't like paper pushing, and that's a lot of what my career was before I started writing and sharing commentary online. Um, it can liberate us from that, and if there's an alternative source of income or a means to support ourselves, I think we can enter into a second renaissance, to be totally honest. I think it's not gonna happen in the short term. I think the short term is gonna be very disruptive, so the next like 5, 10, 15 years. But if we can get past that, like I think we really could see a new resurgence of human created art and writing and poetry and music and cooking and all sorts of things, the things that humans have the competitive advantage in that AI and robots and automation doesn't. But we have to get there. And I think getting there is going to be the hard part. So he talks, so they go in how our children and our grandchildren are going to face a profound challenge: how to live meaningful lives in a world where they're no longer the smartest, most capable entities in it. And I think this is going to be true not just for Gen Alpha and the generation that's coming up underneath it. Like I think it's true for all of us, because something that's happening alongside the AI revolution, and I think they're complementary. But there's a huge revolution happening in biomedical sciences right now, in life sciences. And so it's not even just that like AI is going to be competitive with us, but we're going to be living longer. And so how do you live 100+ year life with meaning and purpose? And if you experience the tyranny of like Groundhog Day, and like, I think we've all had these pockets of seasons of life, right? Where like you wake up and every day is the same thing and you're like, I have to do this for the rest of my life. It'll drive you crazy. I think the biggest threat to human sanity is boredom. And because I was saying before, like if we don't have jobs, we don't have hobbies, like we're gonna be perpetually bored unless we're engrossed in like a Ready Player One type world where we're just playing video games all day, which is possible. I mean, that's definitely possible, but I don't think we're prepared for the boredom, and so we need to really start having these deep philosophical and existential questions, like what does it mean to live a life in a world where we're in it with something we created, AI. Okay, so they say leading researchers at frontier AI companies, so Google, Meta, Anthropic, OpenAI, X, or XAI, whatever Elon Musk calls it. Those are all kind of the big ones right now. They're the ones who are creating the systems that we're going to be using, and they believe that by 2030, it's going to exceed human cognitive capabilities. I will link this below in the description. There is a report that just came out called AI 2027, and this is from a lot of nonprofits are opening, research organizations are cropping up in Silicon Valley, that are kind of they come from a technical background, but they're able to explain what's happening in a way that some of these other companies can't, because obviously like Google and OpenAI and Meta and all these companies have an incentive to sell AI because that's their product. So there's these like nonprofit, independent, third-party research firms that have cropped up, and this one created a scenario basically of how things could end up, and they project because of the proliferation of AI agents, that within the next 2 years, really, that's kind of all we have left. Within the next 2 years, most people will start seeing job disruption, job losses. So I think 2030 is kind of like the mental benchmark we're all working with right now. I think it's a lot less. So I think it's 2025 now. So I would say, we're already seeing a disruption. So I would say, 2026, 2027, we're going to start seeing really profound shifts. So when I say this is urgent, it's urgent because we're running out of time to really start preparing ourselves for it. And so they asked a really fundamental question, like, what does it mean to be a human in an age of super intelligent machines? What exactly is special about our minds? Like, if AI can do math and science, like, what does it mean to be human? Like, millennials, Gen Z, we've all been raised to do like standardized tests and quantitative tasks and build resumes and compete with one another. Like, I don't like most people don't even read books anymore, right? And so that's one of the reasons why honestly I'm starting to do YouTube, is because I acknowledge that a lot of people aren't reading. And so like what is special about like thinking is important, right? But like we're not reading books. We can't have civil discourse with one another. Like I can't have a conversation with most people about like why I believe something or why I don't believe something without being called some sort of like bigot or phobe or whatever. Like we can't have conversations anymore. So what is it about our minds that is special? And then this raises a really important question, like what is left for our species to do? Like if we don't have a cognitive comparative advantage, we're not procreating, we're not engaging in relationships, we're isolated, like what on earth are we here to do? I forget. I left a note here for myself when okay, this is good. Yeah, so this is why I also see at the same time culturally we're moving towards conservatism and we're seeing a reaction. So that's why we're seeing anti-feminism on the rise. We're seeing young men move more political conservatism. There's an uptick in Christianity. A lot of people are back to church now. And I think we're moving back in this direction, not because like we need to send women back into the kitchen, but because that's what's worked throughout all of human history. Like the family structure, religion, belief, like community, that's the thing that has enabled our survival, right? Like if you were a hunter gatherer and you didn't participate in your tribe and you argued with everyone and you didn't do your fair share of work and you didn't go on hunts, like you died. And obviously like your lineage isn't existing right now. And so I think conservatism worked, and I don't say that in like the political conservative sense, I say it more in like a cultural sense. So I think this is why we're seeing a resurgence in that. And I think this answers the question that they ask here. It's, I think we're at a point where we as individuals, collectively as a society, but also as individuals, have to make a choice. Like, do we go headfirst into this AI world that's being created? And do we just blindly let these companies dictate what we're going to do? Kind of like what we did in the last decade and a half with social media. Are we just going to invite these new technologies into our lives without any personal roadblocks and safety nets in place? Or are we going to make a choice on how to use these technologies? Cal Newport writes a lot about this in Digital Minimalism. Highly recommend reading that if you haven't. I've written about it. I'll drop a link below. But like, we have to create rules about how we're going to use technology in our lives. And so, an example that comes to mind is iPad kids. I think parents have to parent. That's important. But you have to make a choice. Like, at what age are you going to allow your children to engage with technology? If you want to give your kid an iPad at the age of 2, that's your prerogative, but there are consequences for that. Likewise, if you want to not give your kids any technology until they're 18, they're not going to be technologically literate to participate in the world. So there's trade-offs you have to consider, but I think people are going to have to start establishing principles and values and sticking to them. And I think the easiest ones to adopt are ones that have previously already existed. And that's where, progressive values, liberal, lowercase l, liberal values are just too fluid. Like, if you can be any gender you want, any religion you want, you can do anything you want, there's no rules, everything's subjective, like, it's anarchy. Like, there's no foundation. Of course, you're going to feel like, out of place and not sure what to do with yourself because there's nothing to hold on to. So I think conservatism is the ability for humans to demarcate their humanness in the sand. Like, they're saying, we are human, this is what we believe, this is what we're going to do. And then from there, create boundaries around technology. So I think that's an answer to this question. Those who do that, I think, will survive, and those who kind of continue going with the flow and kind of accepting fluidity and not having values or principles that they live by, I think they're going to go extinct. I mean, they're not procreating, so I don't know who's going to carry on their beliefs into the future. So I think that answers that question. Okay, let's see. Oh, this was really interesting. So the essay starts with Avital, and she brings up a really interesting point. She asks, she talks about using AI with her significant other, I presume. And she talks about how she approaches like problems and questions. And this is really interesting because she says it's eerie and uncomfortable to see this tool move into a domain that used to be filled by someone I love. And this gets back to what I was just saying with like establishing boundaries. Like, people are now using this technology to replace like trusted humans in their lives. So therapists, significant others, like we're seeing a rise of AI girlfriends and boyfriends. So this is really interesting. And given that she's a Gen Zer and, fresh out of college, this is really interesting because I suspect more and more young people will do this. And if there aren't adults in the room to shepherd them, because, let's be honest here, like, just because you're legally an adult doesn't mean like you know how to fully adult. So if there aren't adults in the room helping set boundaries and parameters and shepherding young people, I think they're going to default into doing this. And I think relationships make human is a competitive advantage of humans. So if we start replacing humans and human relationships with AI relationships, like, I don't know that that's a good thing. What else does she say? She says, she talked with her mom, with her mom wanting to use Claude, and her mom found Claude helpful because it was able to like communicate with her with empathy in a way that like her existing relationships can't. And she said, we all want that kind of wise friend who will lean in and really listen, someone infinitely patient and non-judgmental who can help us process our anxieties while nudging us gently towards greater wisdom. Again, this is a slippery slope and kind of dangerous. I don't know that we want to replace friendships with an AI. And, one of the things that they keep, researchers keep bringing up is there's a lot of bias in how the AI is trained, right? Like, there's a handful of people training AI, so they're imposing their values in how the AI is created, and those might not be aligned with your personal values. So that's something to keep in mind. Um, AI can hallucinate, and I don't know, like, I'm not an AI expert, so if someone is and wants to chime in, like, please do. But my understanding of what I've kind of researched on my own so far is like AI wants to please us. It's trained like kind of like Pavlov's dog. Like it wants to do good because that's how it's rewarded. So if it's learning pattern recognition based on rewards, it's going to keep doing things to get rewards. So it can give like false positives. And so I don't know that I would trust the wisdom of AI. Like I'll read Marcus Aurelius and study meditations and trust that more than I would trust an AI. So these are things, I think we need to start thinking about. Okay, this is Tyler Cowen, the economist. He's saying that the top models are better economists than he is. And one thing that he notes here, which I think is really important, is that they haven't yet started posing questions. So I think this is another way that humans can lean into their humanness, as we can ask questions. Like AI is responding to tasks and doing complex things, but at the end of the day, as of right now, it's not sentient to the point where it can spend hours thinking about complex questions like, why am I here? What's my purpose? Is there a God? Kind of the things philosophers have been grappling with for millennia now. AI can't do that yet. When it can, I think that's going to be a scary point in time. But until then, that's what we can do. Like we are able to ask questions in a way AI can't. So that's a human competitive advantage. Yeah, okay, so he talks about this is another thing that's important. So he's 63, so he's a boomer or like cusp Gen X. But he's talking about this that he's not really worried about his future because he doesn't really have much time left. And I don't mean that in the crass way, just like, just being pragmatic here. He, maybe will have another 20, 30 years at most. So he's going to see the start, obviously, of this transition, but he's not going to be around to deal with the consequences. And this is really important because he doesn't, this person, obviously a economist outside of DC, trusted expert. We have a whole expert class of this group of people. So boomers, cusp Gen Xers who are making legislation, making policies about how AI is going to govern all of our lives, and they're not going to live through the consequences of it. Like, so we're dealing with a situation right now where short-term interest, and this isn't new, right? Like anyone who follows finance and the quarterly earnings cycle knows this. Like short-term gains are kind of obfuscating the need for long-term planning. And so this is something I think where we're going to see an odds, the people with the resources, the experience, the capital, the incentive to build all this infrastructure out are going to have things go their way because they have all those things, whereas young people don't have capital, don't have experience, don't have resources, don't really have a voice. And so it's going to be hard to reconcile some of those differences. All right. So now that they've kind of set their like background information a little bit on their perspectives, so this, what do we do? So one thing they acknowledge is that most humans will be working with AI every day in their jobs. And at some point, the AI is going to know most things about the jobs better than the humans. And the thing with agents is that AI agents is that they're being created with the intent of training agents. So right now, like we're learning how to work alongside AI. Eventually, AI is going to get good enough where it's training itself. So to give you an example or like a metaphor, so imagine like you have an intern, like your job, you are training the intern. In this case, the intern is the same as like an agent, an AI agent. You're training the intern. Eventually the intern gets good enough where you say, hey, intern, go bring 5 of your friends into the company and you train them. It's like a train the trainer kind of situation. So that's where we're heading, is we're trying to get agents good enough so that they can begin training without us. And that's when we start losing control, and that's where some of these existential questions are going to start arising. This piece right here is something I deeply resonate with, and I think a lot of you watching this will too. So, for society or civilization as a whole, there's a critical and indeed quite large subclass of people who take pride in their brains. Like, I think almost everyone in the knowledge workforce, like, this is how we were programmed. We were deprogrammed to value family. We were deprogrammed to value relationships. But we were programmed to take value in getting good grades, getting into good schools, working for an elite company, making a lot of money, prestige, status. And so this is going to be a huge disruption for a lot of us, and myself included. Like, I can cook, and I'm kind of working on becoming better at managing a household, and I do take pride in that. Um, but like, my kind of vocation is writing. That's the thing I'm skilled at. That's the thing I like to do. I love to learn. And so if that's taken away from me, like, that's a huge portion of my identity that's gone. And like, how do you reclaim that? I think it's a really big question. So now they break it down into different aspects. So the first thing they talk about is blue collar work is going to become more valuable. And that is absolutely true. We're already seeing it. And I will tell you, like, I don't know who concocted the myth. I don't know if there's a cabal of high school guidance counselors out there who just want to pump, like, are getting kickbacks from colleges. I don't know. But I bought into this lie, and I think a lot of other people did too, that blue collar work is undignified. People who do blue collar work are dumb and they're stupid and they don't know anything. It's not paid well. It's gross. It's grimy. And like, sure, some jobs are like laying tar on like new pavement on a hot summer's day, not fun, like landscaping, that kind of stuff. But if you're skilled at what you do, like, you can make a lot of money. There's a guy, I'll link his videos. He's called SB Mowing. It's a guy who's probably in his late 20s, 30s, and he makes YouTube videos. He owns a power washing business. He mows lawns, and then he makes YouTube videos of him doing these things. You can like look up his social blade. You can use that to look up his earnings, but he has merch. He has clients. I'm sure he has like a team of people. Like, this guy, like, I think he's doing pretty good for himself. Like, no questions asked. So, you look at that and just find anyone on YouTube, like any blue collar worker interested. There's someone on here who's, there's a guy we watch who he finds like old cars and they're like in people's backyards. He goes there, he gets them working just enough, and he drives them back home. And he's got a brand and all of this stuff. So the belief that blue collar work is undervalued, doesn't make money, like that tech isn't better, is full bollocks. Like, it's not real at all. So I do believe like blue collar work is definitely going to take off. And this is going to create a political fault line, right? Because within we deindustrialize the economy, we push all these kids out to college, all these kids are now adults, and things didn't really pan out for us. But in the process, you like stigmatize, like the culture stigmatized blue collar work. So you have this class of educated elites in like knowledge and like white collar work, and they don't respect people in blue collar work. And this fault line exists in cities, between cities and rural areas, between who went to college and who didn't, expectations of how much money you make and how much you don't. And so we saw this with the first election of Donald Trump in 2016. Like, this was a fault line that was latent and existed, and he got elected in part because he was the first person to run for office who gave voice to blue collar workers. And that's frankly why he got elected again, because he is giving a voice to the disenfranchised. And so keep this in mind. Like, for however many decades now, 2-3 decades, culture has said you're worthless. Blue collar workers, you're worthless. You're not adding value. You're dumb. You're ignorant. You're uneducated. And now the hens are coming to roost. And white collar workers are going to become dependent on unemployment funded by these blue collar workers. They're going to be demanding more and more services because they're going to be displacing the economy. And I don't know. I can't see a guy who's spending 80 hours a week with overtime on an oil rig being like, okay, finance bro on, in Manhattan. Sure, let me like pay 40-50% of my taxes so you can have unemployment. Like, I don't see a world where that's possible. And so this can be a huge fault line that people really need to start paying attention to. Okay, they also lay out some areas where AI is going to be important. So this isn't really a necessarily good place to dive into that, but there are definitely opportunities. I think it's worth paying attention to. They do talk about things like humans can do better. And so like the competitive advantage for humans is going to be like mentors. I disagree with coaches. I think we're oversaturated in coaches, especially life coaches. But like entertainers, comedians, they talk about greeters, charmers, and flatterers. If this brings back the Walmart greeters who gave out like the smiley face stickers, like I'm all for that. I think that could be really interesting. Or like the Costco sample givers, I think that could be really interesting. So that could be fun to keep an eye on. They dive into how AI is going to augment us. So in the immediate short term, right, blue collar work is going to become more important. But then within that, because not everyone is going to go blue collar, you have to know how to use AI. So you have to be AI literate. You're going to know how to work with it, how to leverage it, and how to utilize it. So if you're not learning to use AI now, if you've never touched it, don't use it in your current workflows, I would highly recommend you get on that real quick, because that's going to be the difference. Those who know how to do it and those who don't, and this is already happening. We're seeing companies come out with AI first policies. So Duolingo and Shopify are two companies that said this. And basically, like, to keep your job at these companies, you need to prove that you're AI literate and you're developing competencies and these skills. So you need to know how to do that. The next section they talk about is leisure, and I will say I think they spent the most time and have the most concrete ideas with regard to work, because I think that's what everyone's talking about, because it's the most immediate short-term concern. These other ones I think are less thought out, much developed, because I don't think people are really thinking about these things. So leisure is a big one. Kind of like what I was saying before, I think we're going to see ourselves into a second Renaissance, golden age. I think it's going to alleviate us from doing a lot of mundane work. That being said, this is going to be a problem, because while they say, hobbies are going to become more important, no one has been doing hobbies because we really can't afford them. Like, millennials and Gen Z have been doing side hustles and working part-time jobs because we can't afford to keep up with the cost of living. So we're not investing in hobbies, and hobbies do cost money. Like, I'm a runner, I run marathons. If I do 2 races, race fees are several $100s. I'm going to be running Chicago later this fall, after lights, hotels, meals, the race fee, all that kind of stuff. Like, it's probably going to be close to $1,000, right? And then I need to get some shoes. I'm in training. I'm in a bit of rehab right now, so there's medical stuff. So, like, even something like running, which literally costs nothing to do, you just put on your shoes and you go outside, like, even that costs money. So people haven't been like developing hobbies because it's super expensive to finance a lot of these hobbies. And so I think this is really important. Like, okay, this is great to say, like, yeah, group hobbies are going to proliferate. Who's going to pay for it? I mean, not the millennials and Gen Zers who can barely cover their cost of living now. So I think that's really important to think about. They talk about the importance of emotional connection, interpersonal connection. I definitely agree with that. And then they talk about how non-legible, esoteric, and hidden forms of knowledge will become more distinctly human. I don't quite know what that means. Maybe like poetry or like creative writing. I'll be curious to see what that looks like. Okay. They also assume UBI, so universal basic income. It's like our current social safety net is not designed for universal basic income. There's a lot of proposals out there for who will pay for it, but there's no one is having this conversation. Like, or Bernie Sanders maybe has brought up, but there's no actual conversation about how it's going to be funded, who receives it. I've written about this previously. Like, there was a test that was done by an OpenAI adjacent research firm, and the data was kind of biased, and it didn't really, like, they framed it in a way that made it seem like it was good and beneficial, but it really just kept up with the cost of living. So it kind of didn't like help people get ahead. It just helped people not struggle. And I don't know that that's like a good place we want to be. And if that's what universal basic income is, it's kind of communist in the sense where it lowers the standards and makes everyone equal and gets rid of the opportunities for growth and advancement. I don't think that that's a good thing. So I do think we need to have a bigger conversation about universal basic income, how it's funded, who's going to dole it out, and what opportunities you can have in addition to it. The next thing we talk about is status. Oh, this is key. This is kind of what I was saying before with like knowledge and brain activity, or using your brain and driving value and meaning from it. We've created a social hierarchy. Humans have a social hierarchy, career ladder, all that kind of stuff, like moving between classes, so social mobility. So we think of things in terms of progressing from one level to another. It's very gamified. That's not going to be able to provide us meaning. So what comes in place of that? I think, okay, so this is where I'm going to add my own 2 cents here. The book Homo Deus by Yuval Noah Harari is really good. I highly recommend reading it. But in that book, he talks about how, again, what I was saying before with the AI revolution and the biomedical revolution, I think we're going to see biology as the new marker for status. And in some regards, we already have. Like, let's look at the Kardashians as an example. Like, the Kardashians set a new standard for beauty. It was a very inorganic standard. So you're getting a Brazilian butt lift, you're getting Botox, your lips are getting like lip injections, like all this stuff you're doing to augment your physical form has changed how women look. Like, just compare me to any like model, right? It's totally different. And so I think we're going to see this take into increasing levels of extreme. And I think my belief, I think the trans movement opened the pathway for this, because the moment we ceded ground and we said gender is a construct, gender is fluid, gender can be whatever you want it to be, we eliminated the veracity of biology. So there are no, like, biology is now subjective. It can be interpreted however you want. And if you have the right enough money and then enough access to medical care, like, you can change your biology to be whoever you want, right? Like, you can do that with, we saw that before with like your aesthetic beauty, like you could change that. We're seeing this with like your physical, like how you identify from a gender perspective. So what is stopping people in a couple of years from like becoming superhumans and cyborgs? And this is something that Harari talks about in Homo Deus. We're going to slowly see the evolution of a completely new species of human that is made of both organic and inorganic matter. And as new technologies like Neuralink as well come online, where your cognitive abilities are amplified by being connected to AI, I think this is going to go to the extremes. And you're going to have different classes of people, and social status is going to be conferred based on like what we value. And to illustrate this, I think consider the Hunger Games. If you've never watched it, watch the first one. But basically, the people in the Capitol like dress like bombastically, and they have like pink hair and like birds in their hair, and they like very costumey. Whereas like people in the districts are poor. They're like kind of like coal miners, right? If you want to compare a coal miner to the Met Gala, that's basically what it's going to be. But it's going to be your physical biology that's going to change, and in the process, that is literally like, we're not even just talking like meaning and purpose anymore. Like, we are literally going to create a new species of human, and that's going to open up a whole host of questions, because anyone who believes in a religious tradition, I grew up in an evangelical church. One of the things that the themes in the Old Testament is God's wrath was always imposed on humans when humans tried to be God. So when they tried to elevate themselves to the same level of God, God said, absolutely not. He sent floods, famines, destroyed civilizations, etc. And I think we are not learning that. We have not learned that lesson. And if you believe or don't, that's neither here nor there. But I think throughout history, like we've seen, like humans have a place, and I don't think we should be pursuing godlike status. And I think this is putting us in a position of not just like developing technology, but creating a new form of life. And I think that is very dangerous. And that is, again, a conversation we need to have. Yeah. Okay. They say here, some stuff from the past, status markers past will make partial comebacks. Again, this is what I'm saying with like motherhood, family, traditional values. I think this is why it's going to make a comeback, because I think people are going to see this and they're going to be like, absolutely not. Like, I'm, not going to augment my body, not going to change things. I want a human life. People are going to choose human life. They say there's going to be the rise of human-only spaces, so seeing enclaves where it's just humans. Different places will handle AI differently, and this is important. I think countries, like how countries are structured and what a country is going to change, and democracy is going to change. And so this is something to really pay attention to. I think in China, we're going to see AI used very differently than it's going to be used in the United States. And so that's why like competition right now with China is kind of important, because if China replaces the United States as the global world order, like China's values are going to govern the rest of us, not like Western values. And you can hate America all you want, you can dislike it. But I think anyone who's ever lived outside of the United States will agree that freedom is better than not freedom. And I will leave it at that. Talk about longer lives, as I mentioned before. This is an interesting note I left here. So if biology becomes more, if biology can change and status is based on biology, like what does this look like in the future? Elysium is a really fantastic movie that kind of dives into like the haves and the have-nots when it comes to technological innovation with regard to human biology and medicine. But here, I give the example of members of Congress. So they're already living longer and they continue to work. And it seems like there's a correlation between like how much money they made and like access to money in their careers and power and prestige and their ability to live longer. So I think this is true. Like we are going to live longer lives. I don't know that's going to be accessible to everyone. So I think I think we're seeing this already. Like there are certain people in positions of power and of financial means that are able to live longer lives than like the average person. And so I think you're going to have the resources to be able to afford a longer lifespan. But then if we can't work and we're all given UBI and UBI lowers the threshold, like I think this is just going to widen the gap between the haves and the have-nots. So I would be skeptical. I'd be skeptical of this and kind of really ask the question like, okay, longevity for who? Like who's going to benefit from all this? I think we assume it's going to be everyone's going to benefit equally, and that's not necessarily true. Talking about raising kids differently, I think that's important. Some things he brings up here, I keep saying he is written by two different people. I'm sorry about that. But they talk about virtuous, teaching kids to find many sources of meaning and social connection. Meaningful endeavors don't have to be compensated. So again, motherhood, I think, is going to make a comeback. I think we're already seeing this, a rejection of feminism, move towards motherhood, and similar things like that. We got to teach kids about how to use AI. So I think that's on the horizon. They also talk about rebellion. They didn't really dive too much into this, but I do think this is already happening. I don't think we're going to see like a Luddite rebellion per se. I think what's going to happen is AI is going to disintegrate all of the institutions we know and trust, and that's going to be incredibly destabilizing. There's going to be political fracture lines. Our courts, our legislative process, like it's not adapted to handle these. So I think we are going to see, unfortunately, violent rebellion as we negotiate a new social contract. Again, like I said, who's going to pay for this? Who gets access to all these new advances? Like who benefits? It's not going to be equitable. And there's going to be people calling for equity in the communist sense, but that's not necessarily good because as history shows us, like that just lowers the standards to make everyone equal. It doesn't raise the standards. So I think these questions are going to have to be asked. I think because we're not in a place where we can agree on subjective or objective reality and we can agree on facts, I don't think we can have these conversations. So where do we go from here? Like that, I think on an individual level, I think we need to start having these conversations, start thinking about these things deeply, like having conversations with your family, neighbors, yourself, spouse, loved ones. Like, what does this look like for us moving forward? I think the next handful of years are going to be very disruptive as a lot of this unfolds and people aren't prepared for it. But I do think on the long end, I am optimistic that This will lead to human flourishing, the likes of which we have never seen before. So yeah, that is this is the essay. If you want to read it in full, it's on the Free Press's website. I highly recommend start if you're not already diving into this stuff, definitely do so. I write about this extensively. I publish new essays every Tuesday and Thursday over on Substack. I'll leave a link down below. Definitely follow along if you would like to get access to those, and I'll share them here as well. Like, subscribe, follow. That helps me out tremendously. I appreciate it. All right, I'm going to go finish my coffee and my croissant. Toodles.